Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
My marriage is over. It's funny, but just saying it out loud hurts. It's not like I haven't known or suspected for the past month or so, but today I passed one of those benchmarks where it sinks in all over again. The worst part about it is the feeling of failure. I mean, it's not like I didn't try. This isn't a case where the unfeeling husband ignores his wife and or her needs while hanging out with the boys. It also isn't a case where I spent so much time at work that we became strangers. I put Trisha first in my life. I never forgot an anniversary or a birthday. I hurried home after work every day and spent every moment that I wasn't at work with her. I read every article I could on keeping things exciting in the bedroom and put them into practice. In short, I busted my ass making ours a perfect marriage. I know in some ways it sounds like I was a wimp, but I had no choice. You see, I knew going into this marriage that if I abused Trisha or ignored her, that it would have a very short shelf life. I knew this because I wasn't her first husband. Her first husband had been a fucking monster. I'd often wondered why she'd marry the asshole in the first place. But she told me that you can't always tell the monsters at first glance. Sometimes it takes a while for the monsters to reveal themselves. Nature often makes the deadliest predators and poisons look the most attractive or the least dangerous. I thought about that as I pulled into the parking lot of the neighborhood bar. That morning I had just signed the divorce papers. I was technically a free man. I had so much sorrow and pain built up inside of me that I decided that coming here was the best way to drown them, and also perhaps do a bit of good for my fellow man. I had a target in mind, and if he was as much a creature of habit as my PIs had indicated, he should be coming to this particular watering hole in the next few moments. It was funny, but although this place was only 2 blocks away from my house, God, it hurt to say, my house instead of our house. Anyway, although this place was only 2 blocks away from my house, and I'd been here lots of times, I'd never been here without Trisha. I had been here enough times with Trisha and other friends that I knew the bartenders and the barmaids by name. Another stroke of irony was that my target came here a lot as well. He pulled in a few moments after I arrived. His aging gray BMW pulled right into the slot next to my midnight blue 2013 Mustang GT. We exited our cars at the same moment. "Nice car," he said, smiling. "Thanks," I said. "If you don't mind me saying it, you look happy." "I am," he said. "Today, I ended months of guilt over a situation I've allowed myself to fall into. But it's all worked out for the best, and now we can move on into our future." "Wow," I said. "That sounds like something worth drinking to." "It truly is," he said, smiling. "Well, I'm here for something much more mundane," I replied, as we walked towards the entrance to the bar. "Just a regular night out with friends?" he asked. "Nope," I said. "It's more like insurance business." He looked at me strangely. "In fact," I said, "I'd be willing to buy you a couple of drinks for a favor that won't cost you a dime." I've been able to tell by his car that he was the frugal type, so I thought that buying him a drink or two might lead him into my web. "What would I have to do?" he asked. "Oh, there he is now," I said, as we walked into the bar. I pointed towards a table in the back where a man sat alone with a laptop computer attached to a box. "I lead my new friend over to him. I work for a company that insists that all of its employees be bonded," I said. "In fact, we have to have regular polygraph screening so they can ensure that we aren't stealing from the company or doing anything that would hurt the company's image. If you could witness me taking my latest polygraph exam, I'll buy your drinks." "No problem," he said. "It actually might be kind of interesting to watch." As we sat down, the man with the laptop hooked me up to the machine. He placed leads on my wrist and a couple on my temples and started the machine. "Okay, Ed, you know the drill," he said. "I'll ask the questions and you give me a yes or no answer. Some of the questions will pertain directly to your work. Others may involve outside interests or even your personal life." I nodded and my guest seemed to be really interested. "Have you, since your last test, been truthful and honest on all of your expense account records?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Have you, since your last test, been truthful and honest with all of your customers?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Have you stolen anything?" he asked. "No," I answered. "Do you think that you could do a better job than your boss does in his position?" he asked. "Yes," I answered. "Would you like his position?" he asked. "Yes," I answered. "Have you ever hit or beaten your wife?" he asked. "No," I said. "Have you ever struck any woman?" he asked. "Never," I said. "Do you ignore your marriage for work?" he asked. "No," I said. "Which would you put first, your marriage or your job?" he asked. "My marriage, of course," I said. "I could always find another job." My witness was very interested. He'd even started watching the needles on the computer screen as each question was read and answered. "Have you ever cheated on your wife?" asked the examiner. "Not once," I said. "Have you ever spoken to other companies about employment opportunities while you worked for us?" he asked. "No," I said. "Have you done everything you possibly could to complete your assignments to the best of your abilities?" he asked. "No," I said. "I need an explanation," he said. "I work my ass off, from 8 to 4, but when it's time to go home, I go home to my wife and I work my ass off trying to please her. I could have done overtime or taken work home with me, but my marriage was more important to me than any job. He and the witness looked over the chart. He started packing everything up. How'd I do? I asked. I'm not sure that Bill will like all of your answers, he said. But you told the truth in every case. You didn't lie about a single question. I think that your boss finding out that you won his job and that you could have done overtime might not put you in the best possible light. But your explanations about how your marriage and your wife are very important to you will carry a lot of weight. He handed my witness a form to sign and a pen. Okay, I said, looking at my new friend. Let's get our first round of drinks. I gestured for a waitress to come over to our table, and when she did, I gave her our orders. That was interesting. Are you in some form of sales work? Yep, I said. I can't believe that they get to ask you questions about your personal life. Isn't that technically illegal? He asked. The benefits package we get is so good that we all sign off on it, I said. From the answers you gave him, you must really love your wife, he said, smiling. I try to be the best husband I can be, I said. If we ever break up, I don't want it to be my fault. But so many marriages end up in divorce these days. As a matter of fact, when we met, she was trying to get away from her first husband, and he was a fucking monster. He beat her regularly. He never wanted to have sex with her, and they never did anything together at all. He just kept her trapped in their house to the point that she didn't feel like a woman or a person at all. She just felt like a thing. All she wanted was to escape, but she had no idea of how she'd support herself. But she'd been willing to risk it just to get away from that monster. It had taken several meetings at a place that both of us frequented to get the whole tearful confession out of her. I think that by the second or third time we'd spoken, I was already a little in love with her. She'd been 32 to my 34, and we seemed perfect for each other. And she really didn't look 32. On first glance, I'd have thought that she couldn't have been a day over 25. After a few more dates, it became customary for us to hold hands, and I began to dream of the day when she might break free of that bastard who was abusing her. After a few more meetings, she decided that he was probably beginning to suspect. Suspect what? I had asked. That I'm interested in someone else, she had told me breathlessly. I was jealous and put off until she'd hinted that the person she was interested in was me. She suggested that we find a place that was more private to meet. After our second meeting in the motel, she told me that she needed a favor from me. I was sure that she wanted me to loan her some money to get away from the monster, and I was ready to give it to her. My only hope was that she wouldn't go too far away from me, because, as I said, I was falling for her, and pretty hard. I don't want to compromise your morals, she told me. But it's been so long since anyone held me, and I hate to ask, but could you? We got on the bed in the motel room, and I wrapped my arms around her, and I just held her. We were fully dressed, of course, but that didn't stop me from getting an erection with her large rounded backside pressed against me. She held my hands in hers, and somehow my hands ended up on her breasts, but she never said a word. By the time she had to leave, I was so worked up that I thought I would explode. She took my phone number so we could arrange to meet again. She called me the very next day and thanked me over and over again for holding her. She told me that I had no idea how much she'd missed just being touched by another human being and what it had done to restore her humanity. I thought again about what an asshole her husband had to be. A few days later, we met again. This time it was at another motel in another area of the city. She told me that we had to keep moving around because if she was caught, it might hinder her attempt to divorce him. Again, that time we ended up on the bed, and this time she'd worn fewer items of clothing. I left there even more worked up. Over the phone the next day, she never mentioned how glad she was for what I'd done. I started to think that maybe she hadn't enjoyed it as much. In fact, she seemed to be distracted as we spoke. When I told her that I would speak to her at another time, she surprised me by telling me that she was almost done, and if I could just wait a few minutes, I'd have her all to myself. I hung up the phone. By that time, it had been about 6 weeks since I'd first met her. I was obsessed with her. She wasn't the most beautiful woman in the world, but she was very pretty, and I'd begun to think of her as mine. I hadn't been on a date or had sex since I'd started talking to her, and I had the feeling that she was just using me. She called me back a very short time later, crying. She begged me to speak to her for just a little while. She told me that she hadn't meant to sound rude or distracted, but she'd been doing something when she called me, and she'd really needed to get it finished before she lost her nerve. Then why didn't you finish it before you called me? I asked her. I wasn't sure about doing it until I heard your voice, she said. Once you started talking, it all came back to me, and I knew I had to do it. You had to do what? I asked. I filled out an application for an online dating site, she said. Ooh, you'd better be careful, I said. Most of the guys on those places are only after one thing. Then we'll have no problems, she said. Because we'll have that in common. I was shocked, and I guess my silence prompted her to start talking again. You're a good guy, Ed, she said. But lying in that bed with you has me so heated up that I just need more. The first time made me feel warm and wonderful and alive. But yesterday just fanned the flames from warmth to lust. As we lay there, I wanted to do more, but you were a perfect gentleman. My husband hasn't touched me in years, Ed. And even then it was a wham, bam, squirt, snore type of thing. Can I be perfectly honest with you, Ed? She asked. Yes, I said. I was hoping that in the long term, like the rest of my life, I'd like to end up with you. But short term, I need to get laid before I scream. I hope you can forgive me for the online dating thing, but this is at least partially your fault. I know I asked you to do it, but you lying there pressing that big thing against my ass and squeezing my titties has me feeling like I'm going to explode. I've had to change my panties 3 times since yesterday. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then I said it. Maybe we could do something tomorrow, I said. I really didn't see it at the time, but she was taking me step by step outside of my comfort zone. Every step we took always seemed like the lesser of two evils, but I was at the point where I was contemplating having sex with a married woman. When we met at the motel that next day, her smile and casual manner disarmed me. Some of the things she said made no sense, but I wanted to believe her so much that I turned off my brain. Maybe it wasn't so much turned off as much as the blood in my system couldn't go to the big head with the brain and the little head with the balls at the same time. I know that this seems wrong, she said. But when you think about it, it isn't. First off, my husband isn't losing anything because I'm not having sex with him anyway. And secondly, since you're going to be my next husband, this is yours anyway. That first time was frenzied and wild. I pounded the shit out of her and she loved it. We were so caught up in lust that time got away from us. I did her the whole afternoon. I had to call back to work to tell them that I'd had car trouble and my cell phone had died. The next week was hard on me. I was having to get as much work as I could done in the morning and early afternoon so I can spend the second half of every day doing her. And while that was going, she was telling me about her plans to divorce him so we could be together. Finally, I told her to serve the papers on him and just walk away. I told her that she didn't need to ask him for anything. Just give him the papers and walk away. She could move into my house with me and I'd replace anything and everything that she left behind. I thought that she'd say no and give me all kinds of reasons why we couldn't. She just looked at me and asked me if I'd marry her when her divorce was final. Of course, I said. I love you. I love you more, she said. And we did it. She got a lawyer and had him draw up divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences. She didn't ask for alimony or anything else, and since they didn't have any kids, there was really nothing he could do. Oh, he did try to fight it. But once again, in the end, there was nothing he could do. We had to wait 6 months for the divorce to be final, but we were married one day afterwards. For the first 6 years and 6 months, I was in heaven. I worshipped her, but then I started to feel like there was something going on. It seemed like we were drifting apart, and there was nothing I could do about it. I started to buy her even more things and do even more for her, but it didn't matter. It was like being in a sinking ship where I couldn't bail fast enough to keep the water out. I finally had to just get out and swim away to save myself and my own sanity. I just let her go. If she didn't want me anymore, there was nothing I could do about it. The man across the table put down his beer and looked at me. I feel really sad for you, Guy, he said. You were the perfect husband. You got her away from the guy who was abusing her and treating her like shit, and that's how she repays you. What a fucking bitch. But you should just get back on that horse. Every woman you run into won't be a bitch like her. I think that maybe in some way she was twisted by the first guy she was with. He treated her like shit, so she got used to it. You treated her so much better, and maybe she started to take advantage of you. Maybe she even started to miss the monster. Women are crazy. Half of them don't really like nice guys like us. They all want that bad boy type. It's funny. They get their panties all worked up over some guy who rides a motorcycle and has left a trail of broken hearts behind him. They all think that somehow their pussy is so magical that it's going to change him into a productive citizen. And they cry like a baby when he does the same thing to them that he did to every other woman he'd ever been with. Fuck her. And you know you were right to just let her go. I'm glad that you didn't lose your dignity trying to fight for her like the monster guy did, he said. Shit, if my fiancé ever tried to pull something like that, I'd drop her ass at the first sign of trouble. But I think I got the best woman in the world. My situation is kind of like yours. Even down to the first husband being a monster. Like yours, this guy beats her all the time and... He stopped talking for a second and thought about it. Well, you saw me take a lie detector test, I said. I've never hit my wife or any woman in my life. Yeah, he said, but half of the guys out there aren't like us. It just seems like a weird-ass coincidence. It's not a coincidence, I said. I'm the monster now. He jumped up and stared at me. Gary, sit back down, I said. There's more to the story. There are a lot of things that Trisha didn't tell you. How do you know her name? He asked. Then he just looked at me and sat back down. By the time that you and Trisha had met, I was already curious. I started to think that maybe I'd done something wrong or hadn't done something I should have. I had a PI follow her for a while to see if she was doing something, and that was when I found out about you. Surprisingly, your pattern was different from mine. She got you into bed almost immediately. The sex is great, isn't it? He nodded his head nervously. Enjoy it while you can. As a word of advice, do what I did, and it will last longer. Read every article you can and keep changing things up. You'll last longer. You see, Gary, right now you're the knight in shining armor who has ridden in to do battle with an evil fucking monster to save Trisha. Once she gets bored with you, then Gary, you'll become the monster. I got in contact with the guy she was married to before me. Gary, my marriage to Trisha lasted for 7 years. I'm by far the longest-serving husband she's ever had. I truly hope that you can beat my record and— How many times has she been married? He asked. I thought you were her first husband. So you were her second. Gary, I was her fourth husband, I said. Her first, she got married to when she was 20. It lasted 3 years. Her second husband lasted 5 years. The guy before me lasted close to 4 years. And like me, he never laid a hand on her. I saw him all of that time like some kind of beast, when in reality, he was just another average guy like me. He tried his ass off to hold on to her, not because he wanted to keep torturing her, but because he loved her so much. Even after finding out about me, he was willing to take her back. I don't have that kind of love. So when I found out about you, I strung her along long enough to get the kind of deal he got. I don't have to pay her any alimony and she just moves in with you. You're going to have to be careful, Gary. She's going to be 40 soon, so when it's your turn, she's going to want some kind of security. If you hold on to her longer, you may end up being the one to foot the bill. But, B. How do we even know that it's the same woman? He asked. I passed him my wallet. I kept lots of pictures of Trisha in it since we didn't have any kids. He looked at my wedding photos and pictures from vacations and trips and holidays. In almost every picture, our faces were pressed together like newlyweds and we were smiling. It's her, he said sadly. Underneath the sadness, I could see a little bit of anger. She looks miserable, doesn't she? I asked sarcastically. I guess it's because of me torturing her. I noticed that one of the waitresses was standing near our table. We're almost done, Jessie, I said. Oh, I don't care about that, she said. She tossed her head and her long brown curls cascaded over her shoulders. She came over to me and leaned over. I overheard you saying that you're divorcing Trisha, and I wanted to tell you that when you start dating again, you should put me first on your list. You should let me know when that happens so I can switch to an earlier shift. She got up and smiled again and headed back to the bar. Anyway, I said, I'm only telling you all of this so that hopefully you'll be more successful than I was. And I'm also telling you because as soon as this is all over, I'm moving to a different state to start over. I just don't see the point in remembering all of the places I hung out in with Trisha and seeing them on a daily basis. This way, when your turn comes, if it comes, you won't have to come looking for me. You'll know up front. And remember, you should probably get a prenup before you marry her. I'd get the kind where in the event of infidelity she doesn't get shit. He gulped very loudly and took a big swig of his beer. From what I understand, I said, she's like a two-stroke motor. She keeps flipping back and forth. She gets off on the cheating and the search for her knight in shining armor. For a little while, the cheating makes the sex incredible. Then it becomes normal and she starts to lose interest. And that's when you become the monster and she has to find a new knight to rescue her from you. You're going to feel pretty shitty for a while when you become the monster, so I want you to remember something. Like I told you already, I met the guy she married before me. He wasn't a monster. He was just a normal guy. He was kind of a sucker like you and me. The real monster here is Trisha. Just remember that, and you'll be fine. I already have a few dates lined up, and some of them seem really promising. I waved at the waitress as I left. Gary seemed to be really shaken up. I walked out of the bar, got into my Mustang, and peeled out of there. For the first time in a while, I felt better. I felt like my life was ahead of me instead of behind me. Maybe I'd started it out with trickery because the whole lie detector routine was faked, but I'd done something to make life a little bit better for the guy who came behind me. And all of my answers had actually been truthful. I pulled into my driveway and went into my house. I decided to have dinner out on my deck. I threw one of those pre-cooked lemon pepper turkey breasts into the oven while I lit a fire in my fire pit. I did a few exercises while it cooked. I wasn't out of shape, but I had time to get into better shape now that I wouldn't be spending most of my time with a selfish, self-centered woman. My next woman wouldn't be a fucking monster, and I intended to take my time finding her. This time it would be true love and— I stopped ruminating while I went to answer the door. I looked out through the peephole and saw Trisha standing there. As I opened the door, she smiled at me. Sorry, honey, my key doesn't work, she said. Can you get my stuff out of the car? What is that smell? Trisha, what are you babbling about? I asked. Remember, I signed your divorce papers this morning. You grabbed a bunch of your stuff and moved out. You told me that I could throw anything you left away. You took all of your clothes and loaded them all into that hulking SUV I bought you. Your key doesn't fit because I had the locks changed. Ed, she said. I'm a woman. Maybe I have a hormone imbalance. Maybe it was a test. Maybe I just wanted to see if you'd really let me go or if you loved me enough to fight for me. I don't want a divorce. I never did. Now bring my stuff into the house and get me a plate of whatever that is that you cooked, and then let's go to bed. It seems like ages since we made love. Whose fault is that, Trisha? I asked. For the past few weeks, I've been begging you for it every night. Well, tonight you're going to get it, she smiled. Any way you want it, for as long as you want it, and every night from now on. I'll bring your stuff in the morning, I said. I opened the door, grabbed her arm, and dragged her up to my bedroom. Trisha knew that she needed to make things right with me, so she was great. I had her in 3 or 4 different positions. When I was totally sated, I picked her up and gently carried her down the stairs. Ooh, you haven't done this in a long time, she gushed. This is just like on our honeymoon. You do me for hours at a time and then carry me downstairs and feed me. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, I didn't turn towards the kitchen. I walked right up to the front door and opened it. I stepped out onto my porch and walked down the 3 small steps to the ground. Then I unceremoniously dropped Trisha on her ass and walked back into the house. A second later, she was banging angrily on the door. What the fuck was that about? She asked. I told you I love you. We're back together again. How can you treat me like this after what we just did? We just made love. I even let you have my... Fucked, I said. Huh? She asked. What we just did was fucked. There was no love in it. The fact that you didn't see the difference makes me wonder if you ever loved me or any of those other poor guys at all. We are not back together, Trisha. You asked for a divorce. I agreed to it. The papers are signed, notarized, and filed. But we can cancel that any time we want to, she said. But we don't want to, I said. I don't want to at least. And you may as well stop lying. The only reason you're here now is because Gary was smart enough to get rid of you before he made the biggest mistake of his life. Good for him. But I'm smarter now too. I'm not going to be your fallback plan. But we just made. She sputtered. You just used me, she hissed angrily. You're a monster. Goddamn Skippy, I said, closing the door and laughing my ass off on the way up to my shower.
Dear listener, if you have reached this far, please click on the subscribe button. It will be a great help.